At his father's funeral, the most powerful mafia boss in Seoul did the unthinkable. He didn't just bury his father. He buried his marriage. "She's a nobody. Get her out of my sight," he roared, as his wife was dragged into the mud. He thought he was free. He didn't know she was carrying a secret that would return 5 years later in 3 small suits to bring him to his knees. This is the story of the boss's greatest regret. Please subscribe, comments, and hit the like button before we continue with the full story. The sky over Seoul was dark and angry, pouring cold rain down on the hundreds of people gathered for the funeral. Junho stood at the front, looking tall and powerful in his expensive black suit. He was now the boss of the city's biggest mafia family. To him, feelings were a sign of weakness, and he wanted everyone to see how strong he was. Mina stood beside him, shivering in the wind. Her heart was already breaking because she had loved Junho's father like her own. She reached out to hold Junho's hand for comfort, but he pulled away. His eyes were as cold as ice. "Get away from me," Junho said loudly. The music stopped, and everyone turned to look. "You don't belong in this family anymore, Mina. You are poor and useless to my future. I am the boss now, and I need a queen, not a nobody like you." Mina's eyes filled with tears. "Junho, how can you say that? We are married. I have been by your side for years." Junho laughed a mean, cruel laugh. He grabbed Mina's hand and roughly pulled the diamond wedding ring off her finger. The crowd gasped as he held the sparkling ring up for a moment before dropping it right into the thick, wet mud near the grave. "That is where you belong, Mina," he sneered. "In the dirt." He signaled to his big, scary guards. "Take her away. I never want to see her face again." The guards grabbed Mina by her arms. They began to drag her away from the funeral, her shoes splashing in the puddles. She didn't scream or kick. Instead, she looked back at the grave of the old man who had always been kind to her. Just before the guards pulled her out of the cemetery gates, she leaned her head down and whispered into the wind. "Rest well, grandfather," she breathed, her voice shaking but brave. "Because in 5 years, I will bring your 3 grandsons back here. And when they arrive, they won't be coming to give him a hug. They will be coming to take back everything he stole from us." Junho stood by the grave, feeling like a king. He watched the rain wash over his expensive shoes, having no idea that Mina's secret was already growing. He thought he had won, but he had actually just started the countdown to his own downfall. He had thrown away a wife, but he didn't know he had just lost 3 sons who would one day make him regret everything. 5 years passed like a fast-moving river. Far away from the cold rain of Seoul, Mina lived in a bright, cozy house filled with the sound of laughter and messy toys. She was no longer the sad woman in the mud. She was a mother, and her life was full because of her 3 greatest treasures, her sons. Leo was the oldest by only 2 minutes, but he took his job very seriously. He was the brave leader of the group. Whenever Mina carried heavy grocery bags, Leo was right there to help. If his brothers were scared of a dark room, Leo would walk in first to turn on the light. He had a strong jaw and a look in his eyes that said he would never let anyone hurt his family again. Then there was Mason, the quiet genius. Mason didn't care much for toy cars or running outside. Instead, he was always sitting on the rug with a glowing tablet in his hands. He was a tech prodigy who could figure out passwords and fix computers faster than most adults. He rarely spoke, but his mind was always working, watching, and learning everything about the world through his screen. Finally, there was little Jihu, the charmer. He was the sunshine of the house. Jihu had a dimple in his left cheek and a smile that could make anyone forget their troubles. He looked the most like his father, Junho, but his heart was completely different. He was kind to every stray cat and always shared his snacks. While Leo was the shield and Mason was the brain, Jihu was the heart that kept them all together. One sunny afternoon, Mina was in the kitchen humming a song while she made lunch. The house was unusually quiet. Suddenly, Mason walked into the kitchen. He wasn't playing a game on his tablet like usual. His small face was very serious, and his fingers were tapping quickly on the screen. He pulled at Mina's apron to get her attention. When she looked down, he held up the tablet. On the screen was a news article from a big business website. There was a large, clear photo of a man in a sharp black suit standing in front of a giant office building. It was Junho, looking colder and more powerful than ever. Mina's heart stopped. She hadn't seen that face in 5 years. Her hand shook as she reached for the counter to stay steady. Mason looked up at his mother with his sharp, smart eyes. He didn't look sad. He looked determined. "Mommy," he said in a small but firm voice. "I did a deep search on the internet. I found the man who made you cry at the funeral." Back in the cold city of Seoul, Junho sat in his giant office at the top of a glass skyscraper. He was more powerful than ever, but he was not happy. He spent his days shouting at his workers and his nights staring at the city lights. His new wife only cared about his money, and his house felt like an empty museum. His guards whispered that the boss was cursed because he was always angry and lonely. Suddenly, the red lights on his computer began to flash. The screen turned black, and then a little white ghost icon started dancing across his monitors. "Sir, it's happening again," his tech assistant yelled, running into the room. "Someone is inside our system. They are moving millions of dollars into charity accounts and deleting our secret files." Junho slammed his fist on the desk. For weeks, a mysterious hacker named Little Ghost had been making his life a nightmare. Little Ghost would scramble the numbers or shut down the electricity in the building. It felt like a tiny, invisible spirit was playing a prank on the entire Mafia empire. "Trace the signal," Junho roared. The assistant shook his head, looking scared. "We can't, sir. The hacker is too fast. It's like they are playing with us like a toy. 1 minute the signal is in Paris, the next it's in Tokyo. They even left a message on your private screen." Junho looked at his monitor. In small, purple letters, the screen read, "Bad men don't get to keep their toys." Junho felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know that thousands of miles away, little Mason was sitting in his pajamas, giggling as he tapped his tablet. Mason wasn't trying to be mean. He was just protecting his mommy by making the bad man lose his power. Just as Junho was about to scream at his guards, his secretary walked in holding a thick, silver envelope. It smelled like expensive flowers and felt heavy in her hand. "This just arrived by private jet, sir," she said, her voice trembling. "It's an invitation to the most exclusive gala of the year. No one knows who is throwing it, but the signature at the bottom says it is from a woman called the Diamond Queen." Junho opened the envelope. Inside was a card made of real gold. It said that the Diamond Queen was looking for a new business partner to run the largest shipping company in the world. This was exactly what Junho needed to save his failing empire. He didn't know that the Diamond Queen was a woman he had once thrown into the mud, or that he was walking straight into a trap. He smiled for the first time in years, thinking his luck had finally changed. He had no idea that the real game was only just beginning. The night of the gala arrived, and the grand ballroom was filled with the richest and most powerful people in the country. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen stars, and the sound of violins filled the air. Junho stood in the center of the room, wearing his finest tuxedo. He straightened his tie, feeling proud. He was sure that tonight, he would meet the Diamond Queen and become the most powerful man in the world again. Suddenly, the giant oak doors at the top of the marble staircase swung open. The room went completely silent. The music stopped, and every head turned to look. A woman stood at the top of the stairs, and she looked like she had stepped out of a dream. She wore a long, flowing dress that looked like it was made of liquid gold. It shimmered and sparkled with every breath she took. Her hair was styled in elegant waves, and around her neck was a diamond necklace that shone brighter than the chandeliers. She didn't look like the sad, crying girl from the funeral. She looked like a movie star. She looked like a queen. Junho stared at her, his mouth falling open. He recognized those eyes. He recognized the way she tilted her head. "Mina," he whispered, his voice shaking. He was so shocked that his hand lost its grip on his drink. His expensive glass of champagne hit the floor with a loud crash, shattering into 1,000 pieces. He didn't even notice the liquid splashing onto his shiny shoes. All he could see was the woman he had once called trash, now standing above everyone else, looking more beautiful than he had ever imagined. Mina slowly walked down the stairs, her gold dress trailing behind her like a sunset. She moved with grace and confidence, smiling at the guests, but ignoring Junho completely. Junho pushed his way through the crowd, his heart beating fast in his chest. He had to talk to her. He had to know how this happened. "Mina." "Wait," he called out, reaching toward her as she reached the bottom step. But before he could get close, a very tall and handsome bodyguard stepped in front of him. The guard was built like a mountain and moved as fast as a lightning bolt, placing a firm hand on Junho's chest to stop him. Mina stopped and slowly turned her head. She looked at Junho's messy hair and his shocked face. Her eyes were calm and cold, like a deep blue ocean. There was no love in them anymore. There wasn't even any anger. She tilted her head and looked at him, as if he were a tiny bug she had never seen before. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice smooth and perfect. "Do I know you?" Junho stood frozen as the crowd whispered around him. His face turned red with embarrassment. He couldn't believe it. This woman looked exactly like Mina, but she was acting like he was a total stranger. He tried to speak, but his throat felt dry. Mina didn't wait for him to recover. She walked gracefully toward a large mahogany table at the front of the room. She signaled for the music to stop once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice echoing through the silent hall. "I didn't just come here to throw a party. I came to announce a change in leadership." She looked directly at Junho, a tiny, sharp smile playing on her lips. "I've spent the last month buying up the debts of the Dragon Syndicate. But more importantly, I now own the deed to the Hillside Estate." The room gasped. The Hillside Estate was the name of the massive, fortress-like mansion where Junho lived. It had been in his family for 3 generations. "It's impossible." Junho finally managed to shout. "That land is mine." Mina pulled a sleek tablet from her assistant's hand and tapped the screen. A document appeared on the giant projectors behind her. It was a legal deed, signed and sealed. "Your business was failing, Junho. You took out loans you couldn't pay back. I bought those loans. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I am your landlord. If you want to keep sleeping in that house, you'll have to answer to me." Junho felt like the floor was falling out from under him. The woman he had kicked out into the rain now held his entire life in her hands. He was so angry and confused that he followed her as she turned to leave the gala. He pushed past the guests, ignoring the cameras and the pointing fingers. He followed her out the front doors of the hall and into the cool night air. "Mina." "Stop," he yelled. "You can't do this. You can't just take my home." Mina didn't stop until she reached a long, black limousine waiting at the curb. The door was already open. Junho ran up to the car, ready to demand answers, but he stopped so fast he almost tripped. Inside the car, sitting side by side on the leather seat, were 3 little boys. They were wearing matching navy blue blazers and looking at him with curious eyes. Junho's breath left his body in a sudden rush. He didn't need a DNA test to know who they were. They had his thick black hair, his sharp nose, and his very own eyes staring back at him. His heart stopped, then began to thud painfully against his ribs. He looked at the 3 identical faces, then back at Mina. He realized that the nothing he had thrown away 5 years ago had grown into everything he ever wanted. Junho could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those 3 little faces in the back of the limousine. He had to know the truth. The next day, he found out through his spies that Mina was taking the boys to a beautiful park near the river. He put on a plain hoodie and sunglasses so no one would recognize the famous Mafia boss, and he hid behind a large oak tree. The park was bright and filled with the sound of children playing. He watched as the three boys ran across the grass. Leo was leading a game of tag, Mason was sitting on a bench looking at his tablet, and little Jihu was chasing a yellow butterfly. Mina sat nearby, looking calm and happy. Junho waited for his chance. When Jihu ran near the bushes to find his butterfly, his hat fell off, and he got a small twig caught in his hair. He sat down to pick it out. This was Junho's moment. He stepped out from behind the tree, his heart thumping like a drum. He felt like a thief, and his hands were shaking with nerves. "Here, let me help you, little guy," Junho whispered. His voice was scratchy and strange. Jihu looked up and smiled his big, sunny smile, the same smile Junho used to have. "Thank you, mister." As Junho reached down to help, his shaking fingers carefully pulled a few strands of hair that had come loose. He tucked them into a tiny plastic bag hidden in his pocket. His heart was beating so hard he thought it might jump out of his chest. He felt terrible for tricking the boy, but he needed to be sure. He quickly walked away before Mina could see him, his eyes stinging with tears he didn't understand. He rushed the bag to the best laboratory in the city. "I need the results now," he told the doctors. "I don't care how much it costs." 2 hours later, Junho was back in his dark, lonely office. He was pacing back and forth, his hands still trembling. He looked at the wedding ring he had pulled out of the mud. He had cleaned it, but it still looked dull. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was his lead lawyer. Junho picked up the phone, his breath catching in his throat. "Well," he barked, trying to sound strong, though his knees felt weak. The lawyer's voice was quiet and full of shock. "Sir, we ran the test 3 times to be absolutely certain. The DNA match is 99.9%. There is no doubt about it, Mr. Junho. Those 3 boys, they're your sons." Junho dropped the phone. It clattered onto the expensive rug. He sank into his chair, put his face in his hands, and finally, the powerful boss began to sob. He hadn't just thrown away a wife. He had thrown away his own blood. Junho did not wait for an invitation. He pushed past the secretaries and slammed open the tall glass doors to Mina's new office. His eyes were red from crying, and his heart was burning with a mix of anger and regret. He looked like a man who had lost everything, even though he was standing in the most expensive building in the city. Mina was sitting at her desk, calmly signing papers. She didn't even look up when the door hit the wall with a loud bang. She acted as if Junho was just a fly buzzing around the room. "Why didn't you tell me?" Junho screamed, his voice cracking. He slammed his hands down on her desk, scattering her pens. "You let me walk away. You let me think I was alone. Those are my sons, Mina. They are my blood, and you kept them hidden in the dark." Mina slowly capped her pen and looked up. Her face was as calm as a quiet lake. "I didn't hide them in the dark, Junho," she said softly. "I took them into the light. I took them away from a man who throws people away like trash. You told me I was a nobody. Why would a nobody have anything you wanted? I am their father," Junho roared, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I have a right to be with them. I can give them empires. I can give them the world." "You had a right to be a husband," Mina replied, standing up to face him. "But you chose a title instead. You don't get to walk back into a life you tried to destroy just because you're lonely now." Suddenly, the small side door to the office opened. Junho froze. Standing there was Leo, the oldest of the triplets. The boy wasn't wearing his fancy gala suit anymore. He was wearing pajamas with little capes on them, and in his hand, he gripped a bright blue plastic toy sword. Leo didn't look like a 5-year-old boy in that moment. He looked like a tiny, fierce soldier. He marched across the room and stepped right between Junho and Mina. He raised his toy sword and pointed it straight at Junho's chest. His little legs were shaking, but his eyes were filled with a brave fire that Junho recognized all too well. "Get away from her," Leo said, his voice loud and steady. He didn't know this man was a powerful mafia boss. To him, this was just the man who was making his mother's hand shake. Leave our queen alone, or you'll be sorry. The next morning, Mina's front yard looked like a giant toy store had exploded. Junho had sent 10 delivery trucks to the house. There were hundreds of deep red roses that smelled like sweet perfume and piles of expensive toys that reached the top of the porch. There were golden bicycles, giant remote-controlled planes, and the newest video game consoles. Junho stood by his car, waiting with a nervous smile. He thought that if he spent enough money, he could buy back the love he had thrown away. He watched from the sidewalk as the front door opened. The triplets walked out, but they didn't run toward the toys with excitement. Instead, Leo looked at the piles of gifts with a frown. Mason checked the prices on his tablet and shook his head. Little Jihu didn't even touch the shiny bicycles. Mina stepped out behind them, looking calm and unimpressed. She gave a small nod to her helpers. Within minutes, a large van from the local orphanage pulled up to the curb. Junho watched in shock as his sons began helping the workers load every single toy into the van. They moved with purpose, handing over the expensive gifts to children who actually needed them. When the toys were gone, the boys turned to the hundreds of roses. Without saying a word, they picked up the beautiful flowers and carried them to the large green trash bins at the end of the driveway. One by one, the red petals were tossed into the garbage until the yard was empty again. Junho ran up to the gate, his face pale. Mina, wait. I was trying to say I'm sorry. I bought the best things in the world for my boys. Mina walked down the driveway, stopping just inches from the gate. She looked at the empty yard and then back at the man who used to be her husband. Her eyes weren't angry. They were just tired. You still don't understand, Junho, she said, her voice quiet but as sharp as a knife. You think you can fix a broken heart with a credit card. You didn't want a wife to love. You wanted a puppet to show off to your friends. You wanted a family only when it made you look powerful. Junho reached out a hand, but the gate was locked tight between them. He felt smaller than he had ever felt in his entire life. Mina leaned closer, her shadow falling over him. You threw us into the mud because you thought we were worth nothing. Now we are the ones who don't need you. You have your money and you have your title. But look around you, Junho. Now you have no one. Junho went back to the only place where he felt he could speak to someone, his father's grave. The cemetery was quiet and foggy, but the silence didn't last long. Suddenly, the sound of car tires screaming against the gravel broke the peace. 3 black vans sped toward him, surrounding the grave. Men with angry faces and heavy sticks stepped out. These were Junho's rivals, the men who had been waiting for him to become weak. You're all alone now, Junho, their leader sneered. No guards, no wife, no family. Today, your empire finally ends. Junho stood his ground, but his heart was heavy. He was outnumbered 10-1. He closed his eyes, thinking this was the end he deserved for being so cruel to Mina. But just as the rivals moved in to attack, a strange humming sound filled the air. High above the trees, a swarm of glowing white drones descended like angry hornets. They moved with perfect precision, circling the rivals and flashing bright, blinding lights. One drone hovered right in front of the lead villain, emitting a sharp, loud siren that made everyone cover their ears. What is this magic? The leader yelled, stumbling back. Before they could recover, 3 armored SUVs roared into the cemetery. A team of highly trained security guards in silver uniforms jumped out, forming a protective circle around Junho. They didn't work for the Mafia. They worked for Mina's new company. Junho looked up at the drones. One of them flew lower, and he saw a small camera lens pointing at him. On the side of the drone was a tiny sticker of a purple ghost. Suddenly, a small voice crackled through the drone's speaker. Target locked. Bad men detected, the voice said. It was Mason. Junho watched in total shock as the drones used tiny lasers to point at the rivals' feet, chasing them back into their vans. The men who had terrified the city for years were running away because of a 5-year-old boy with a tablet. Mina's guards stood tall, making sure the area was safe, but they didn't even have to fight. The technology had already won. Junho leaned against his father's cold tombstone, his breath coming in short gasps. He looked at the high-tech machines buzzing gracefully above him. He had spent his whole life building an army of tough men and weapons, thinking that was what made a king. A single tear rolled down his cheek as he realized the truth. His 5-year-old son, the boy he had never even held, was more powerful than his entire Mafia army combined. Mason wasn't just a genius, he was a protector. And Junho realized that he wasn't the strongest man in the world, he was just a man who was very, very far behind. The final meeting happened at the old park where the trees were losing their leaves. Junho looked like a shadow of the man he used to be. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his eyes were tired. He wasn't surrounded by guards or fancy cars anymore. He was just a man waiting for a chance he didn't deserve. When Mina arrived with the 3 boys, Junho dropped to his knees right there on the grass. He didn't care who was watching. He pulled a thick stack of legal papers from his pocket and held them out with shaking hands. "Mina, listen to me," he begged, his voice cracking. "I've signed everything over. The buildings, the ships, the money, the entire empire. It's all yours. I'll walk away from the Mafia forever. I don't want to be a boss anymore. I just want to be Dad. Please, just let me sit at the table with you." Leo, Mason, and Jihu stood like a wall in front of their mother. They didn't look at the gold pen or the important papers. They looked at the man who had stayed away for 5 long years. They remembered the stories of the rainy funeral and the mother who had to work 3 jobs to keep them fed. Mina looked down at the papers that represented billions of dollars. She didn't even reach out to touch them. A gentle breeze blew through her hair, and she looked younger and stronger than she ever had when she was his wife. "Junho," she said, her voice filled with a quiet sadness. "You still think everything has a price tag. You think you can trade a kingdom for a seat at our table. But a father isn't something you buy with a business deal. A father is someone who stays when things get hard." Junho looked at his sons, his eyes pleading for one of them to speak for him. But Leo just gripped his mother's hand tighter. Mason tucked his tablet away, and Jihu hid his face against Mina's side. They didn't need a king. They already had a hero. "Keep your throne, Junho," Mina said softly. "We don't need your money. We have a family, and that is something you will never be able to own." She turned around, and the triplets followed her without looking back. Junho watched them walk toward the parking lot, their 4 shadows stretching out together as one. As the first drops of a cold afternoon rain began to fall, Junho stayed on his knees in the dirt. The legal papers got soaked, and the ink began to run, turning into messy black stains. He sat there all alone in the gray light, finally understanding the hardest lesson of his life. He had all the riches in the world, but he was a king without a kingdom. He finally knew that true power wasn't found in a crown or a title. It was found in the love he had thrown away. Moral lessons. The story of Junho and Mina teaches several powerful lessons about life, choices, and what it truly means to be successful. Here are the core moral lessons. 1. True wealth is not found in money or power. Junho spent his whole life chasing a throne. He thought that being a mafia boss and having billions of dollars made him the most powerful man in the world. However, by the end of the story, he realized he was actually the poorest. True wealth is found in the people who love you and the family that stands by your side. 2. Karma is a silent witness. The story shows that how you treat people when you are at the top determines how they will treat you when you are at the bottom. Junho was cruel to Mina when he thought she was weak. Because he planted seeds of cruelty, he harvested a life of loneliness. Actions always have consequences, even if they take 5 years to catch up to you. 3. Respect is earned, not bought. Junho tried to use toys, roses, and even his entire business empire to buy the title of dad. He learned the hard way that you cannot purchase a relationship. Being a father or a husband is an active role that requires presence, kindness, and loyalty, not just a bank account. 4. Your value does not depend on others. Mina's journey is a lesson in self-worth. When Junho called her trash and nothing, she didn't believe him. Instead, she worked hard, raised her sons, and built her own empire. She proved that no matter what someone else says about you, you have the power to define your own value and change your future. 5. Family is a shield, not a business deal. The triplets showed that a real family protects one another. They weren't impressed by Junho's fame or wealth because they saw that he didn't have a good heart. To them, their mother was the queen because she was there for them every day, proving that love is the strongest bond of all.